Hello, welcome to Main Focus. My name is Andrew, and tonight we are going to talk about ISO and shutter speed through astrophotography. I have my camera set up. We're going to take a picture of Orion using the exposure triangle so that way we can get an even exposure. Last week I did a video on aperture, so you can go check that out. I figured that one took a little bit more time to understand. Shutter speed and ISO are relatively simple. Your ISO determines how much light gets onto your sensor. The lower the ISO, the less light. The higher the ISO, the more light at the exchange of digital noise. Your shutter speed determines the blurriness of your photos. If you have a fast subject, you want something in the range of 2/50th of a second to 4,000ths of a second. If you're looking to get like the blurriness of the water or star trails, you probably want to go around 2 seconds to 30 seconds, depending on your situation. I have my ISO currently set to 3200, and we are gonna play back and forth with the shutter speed to see what kind of detail we can get in the stars. I like to go into the live view. And then if you zoom in a couple times, you can see the stars, and you can manually focus from here. Usually if you can see the green of the aberration and the red or magenta, over-focused is green, under-focused is purple, so you gotta kind of try and find the middle point. That's the hardest part about astrophotography, is finding your focus. They sell tools for that. There's a button-off mask. I use it, but in this situation, I think I can eyeball it good enough. So one of the things that you would change when doing astrophotography is your long exposure noise reduction. I'll get a little bit more into that in a settings change video, but for now, the whole idea is it takes twice as long to take a picture because it's processing more information during that picture. So if you go into your menu and turn that off, you go to menu, you come over here to custom functions, and then you got long exposure noise reduction. I always keep this off because it doubles the time it takes to take a picture. And if you're shooting in RAW, you want control over your pictures anyway. And this removes a little bit of control from your final picture. When shooting the stars, you want to have it on one shot or self-timer. And then I'm going to reduce the ISO to 100. I'm going to keep the shutter speed the same so you can see how much less light you actually get into the photo. It's almost black. You literally can't see anything. So your ISO is your sensitivity, and when you're dealing with astrophotography, sensitivity is a major thing. So we'll boost the ISO up to its maximum, and then we'll take a picture. And then if you look, you can see how fuzzy the background is. That's that digital noise. When your sensor is struggling to find the light, it makes up its own information, so it's random noise. Each time you take a picture, there'll be a different pattern, so no two noise patterns are the same. With astrophotography, you take calibration frames later on, and that will eliminate a lot of that noise and aberrations in the background. That's for another day. I still need to learn a little bit more about that before I can try and explain that in a video. I found that on Photons to Photos is a website. You can find out your camera's ISO readout, and it compares how much noise you get to signal depending on that camera's ISO. I will post the link in the description. I have my aperture at 1.8 because that's the as wide open it can get. Lets the most light into the lens. Normally I don't like to shoot at 1.8 because it does fuzz out the picture a little bit compared to something like an f4. F4 is not bad if you can provide the correct exposure time. So as far as exposure time, we'll bring this up to 200th of a second and take a photo. Bring this back down to 3200 ISO, so that way we're at where our baseline shot was before. And we'll take a picture here. And that's a fast shutter speed. So as you can see, it's almost the same as having the ISO all the way down. The shutter's not open long enough to let enough light to the sensor, even though the sensor is at 3200, which is allowing a lot of light in. So what we'll do is we'll reduce that shutter speed. Let's give it 4 seconds. 4 seconds feels like a lifetime in the world of photography in the cold. So what do we have now? Now we have this image that's really bright. That might be a nebula. So what I like to do is I like to keep my ISO at 3200 because that's where I have the best noise readout. I'm gonna drop it down to 400 just so we can see what a little bit of motion blur looks like. And then to make it easier, I'll put my aperture up to 4. So that way we can get an exposure that's properly exposed without overcompensating for the brightness. And hopefully from here we can get star streaks so that way I can show you the blurriness of the photo. Yeah, there we go. Now you can see the stretchiness of the stars. So when you have a longer shutter speed, that keeps the shutter open and lets more light onto the sensor. Anything in the frame will be blurred for the length of the shutter. So in this instance, with the Earth rotating, the stars move at a certain pace, and the longer your shutter speed is open for, the more star trails you have. If you want your stars to be tack sharp, then you need to have a shutter speed just fast enough to match the Earth's rotation. There are apps for that. There is a PhotoPills app where you can go in and you can put your lens, your aperture, and your camera, and it'll do all the calculations to find out how long you should have your shutter speed open for to have a non-blurry star photo. It's the 500 rule, which I don't know the exact rule, and that's why I use PhotoPills, because it does the math for me. PhotoPills is an amazing app. I'm not going to sell you anything yet, but if you're going to buy anything for photography, I highly recommend PhotoPills. I'm going to put my ISO back up to 32. I'm going to bring my shutter speed down to 2 seconds, and I'll bring my aperture back to 1.8. Then I'm going to bring up my live view. Then I'm going to recenter Orion. Get a few good pictures of Orion while the moon's not in my face. I like astrophotography. This is my first time taking pictures of Orion, though. So in the astrophotography tool bag, there's your long exposure noise reduction setting in your camera. If you're not using an intervalometer, you want to have a 2-second timer. You want to have your focus on manual, and you want a manual focus. If you're having trouble manual focusing, use your cell phone camera to zoom in on the LCD screen. And then, I mean, you got to play around, you got to juggle, but it helps. It helps you zoom in that little bit more, so that way you have a little bit more clarity. Your shutter speed is going to determine the length of your star trails. Anything too long, you'll have star trails, and anything too short, you won't gather enough light to have the information you need in your picture. Your ISO will determine how much light hits your sensor. Too low of an ISO and you won't be able to absorb enough light to get a picture regardless of how long your shutter is. Too high of an ISO and you'll have to deal with the digital noise aspect of it. You could keep the long exposure noise reduction on in that aspect, but if you take a 30-second long photo, then you're going to get an additional 30-second long data processing on the noise. So you'll only be able to take 1 photo a minute on that ratio. So I like to keep my long exposure noise reduction off and deal with it in post on my own terms. If you're taking hundreds of photos to stack them in a software, then you use calibration frames. You put the lens cap over your lens and then take X amount of photos of just darkness, so that way it takes random noise patterns and the software will process or eliminate the different patterns, and you get left with a cleaner signal. Astrophotography is pretty advanced, and it's far beyond what I'm capable of at the moment. But it's something that I really enjoy doing. I get to sit out here and relax and just be peaceful. Kind of sucks that it's cold, but I can live. Hand warmers. 2 layers of sweaters, 2 socks. Well, obviously 2 socks, but 2 pairs of socks. And with that, I think I've gotten enough photos. So if you see my face again, it's because I forgot something.